Hi everyone, welcome to Difference Frames the World, a permanently demonetized channel to see the world from a different angle. Even though the platform has demonetized our channels for over a year, we refuse to succumb. We sincerely thank our patrons and supporters for keeping DFTW alive through donations via PayPal, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and WeChat. We are in a difficult situation, but we will not give up. Today we discuss the tension in the West Pacific between China and the United States. As the new year began, the waters near China had become extraordinarily volatile, especially when the United States dispatched its aircraft carriers to the area to flex its muscle. Among the carriers were the USS Nimitz, a fleet carrier, and the USS Makin Island, a lightning carrier. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, Chung-Hoon, part of the Nimitz carrier strike group, is deployed to the U.S. 7th Fleet. It sailed through the Taiwan Strait, showing America's intent to complicate the situation. We repeatedly mentioned that Beijing and Washington couldn't have peace in the coming 10 years. The frequent provocation of the U.S. Navy in the Western Pacific, particularly in the Taiwan Strait, says everything. The USS Chung-Hoon was named after a Chinese-American general born in Hawaii. As part of the Nimitz carrier strike group, its passage through the Taiwan Strait sends an extraordinary signal to Taiwan's independence elements. The problem is whether the Nimitz carrier will trespass on the Taiwan Strait. We hardly think so. As one of the few carriers in service, the U.S. military dares not send it to irritate China, as the latter possesses hypersonic weapons that can destroy the fleet from 2,000 kilometers away. At the end of 2022, China sent its first carrier, Liaoning, to approach the second island chain, and the distance to Guam was merely 600 kilometers. It was the first time a Chinese carrier fleet physically threatened Guam. While the U.S. deployed two carriers in the Western Pacific, China sent Liaoning and Shandong carriers to respond. It is a rare opportunity for Chinese carriers to face their opponents in the ocean. The U.S. aircraft carrier Nimitz has been in the Philippines for a while. Still, it has been hesitant to enter the South China Sea because the training range of the Chinese carrier group has overlapped with the combat deployment range of the Nimitz aircraft carrier, and the two carriers are facing each other. If the carrier aircraft of the Nimitz goes a little further, it may lead to some misunderstanding and unnecessary conflict. Suppose the U.S. carrier sent its carrier-based aircraft into Liaoning's alert area. In that case, it could take things to another level and turn the Liaoning carrier's simulated strike exercise into an actual strike. Moreover, China's unmanned aerial vehicles were watching over the U.S. carrier strike group, and the Chinese Army's DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles could provide necessary support from hundreds of kilometers away. The U.S. military has not deployed hypersonic weapons yet, and its defense system cannot intercept China's long-range missiles like DF-26, which can cover a diameter of 5,000 kilometers targeting any object in the first and second island chains. Furthermore, the Chinese Army stopped communicating with the U.S. military after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in early August 2022, so the U.S. did not want to make any audacious moves to cause unnecessary misjudgments. The USS Makin Island is a lightning carrier capable of carrying F-35B stealth fighters. Although it stayed beyond China's 9-dash line in the South China Sea, China sent a formation with the Shandong carrier strike group to greet it. According to the U.S. military's analysis, China's dual carriers have posed a severe threat to the U.S. military's dual carriers in a simulated strike exercise. On December 21, 2022, a Chinese military plane came within 3 meters of a U.S. Air Force aircraft in the South China Sea, forcing it to take evasive maneuvers to avoid a collision, according to a statement from the U.S. military. The U.S. regards the South China Sea as international airspace and sends its planes and ships thousands of miles away from its home to protect the so-called navigation freedom there. However, most known pirates are found in Africa and North Europe, not in the waters which they refer to as Indo-Pacific. Many viewers may wonder why the U.S. is belligerent, having launched hundreds of wars with various countries in less than 250 years. And most people do not understand why it involves itself in the South China Sea, which is 10,000 miles away from North America. There might be dozens of answers, but the most important reason is that the U.S. is desperate to stop China's rise to maintain its global dominance. The world's population has exceeded 8 billion, but the US only has 330 million people, around 4% of the world's total. Even if we include all its allies' populations, the West accounts for less than 10%. How can the US dominate the world forever, even with the help of its so-called allies? The answer is no, but the US will not give up its hegemony if it can still flex its muscle worldwide. Moreover, the country's military-industrial complex must instigate global chaos to sell more warplanes and weapons. Take Taiwan as an example. It wants the DPP government to make payments before fulfilling the orders. Ironically, even if Taiwan pays, the US military may not be able to deliver those weapons as requested. The Ukraine war has almost depleted America's safety stock, and in 2022, it had to stop deliveries to Taiwan and transfer them to Kiev. Even though the US promises to sell weapons worth billions of dollars to Taiwan in the coming years, according to the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, it may not have the capacity to produce them. It needs to maintain its warplanes and ships decently, and most of its vessels, including aircraft carriers, should be well painted to prevent corrosion. The Nimitz aircraft carrier deployed near China is almost 48 years old, and in 2024, it will be USS Lexington, CV-16, and Kitty Hawk, becoming the longest-serving ship in U.S. history. Most U.S. aircraft carriers were scrapped or stricken after a service life of 20 to 40 years, but in recent years, the U.S. has had to keep their aged carriers in service. Kitty Hawk CV-63 is a good example. It was decommissioned after 48 years of service and is undergoing scrapping. Another carrier, USS Enterprise, CVN-65, was inactive after 51 years of service in 2012 and decommissioned 5 years later. USS Nimitz CVN-68 might be scrapped shortly, although it is much younger than the incumbent president. Still, the Pentagon has to deploy it in the Pacific region to scare China, showing the U.S. Navy is short of carriers to protect the so-called navigation freedom. The United States has 11 aircraft carriers in service, the world's number one undoubtedly. However, only a few can be deployed, as others need to be maintained now and then. It is worth mentioning that the U.S. needs more facilities to repair ships in the Asia-Pacific area. If a war between Beijing and Washington breaks out in the Western Pacific, the U.S. may need more robust aircraft carriers to face the Chinese army. Aircraft carriers have dominated the ocean for a century, but they will likely become moving coffins when attacked by anti-ship weapons. When the Chinese army conducted military exercises in August 2022 after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, the USS Reagan immediately escaped from the exercise area, fearing it might become the target of China's ballistic missiles. In early 2021, we already pointed out that the US would play Taiwan or the South China Sea cards after it failed to contain China with the Xinjiang forced labor issue, and we predicted that Taiwan would be the focal point. In the past 2 years, the tension between China and America results mainly from the Taiwan issue. In 2023 and 2024, Taiwan will continue to be the main problem between Beijing and Washington. Chinophobia is the root cause of American politicians' craziness. It is a bipartisan consensus to outcompete China in the States. Congress even gave more money to the U.S. defense than Biden had asked in the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act. However, more money does not necessarily make the U.S. military more competent. For instance, the F-35 family has countless problems that may take forever to solve. The rising national defense budget cannot stop the Chinese army from quickly catching up with the U.S. military. According to Beijing's state news agency, China successfully carried out a second test of a reusable suborbital vehicle in August 2022. The above-mentioned suborbital vehicle should be part of a hypersonic transport system that could send people or cargo to any corner globally within 60 minutes. When it comes into use, a person can fly from China to the US at 7 in the morning and have breakfast with his friends at 8, and he still has time to fly back to Beijing for lunch with his wife or girlfriend before 12. It is too late for the US to stop China's advance, even though Washington has started trade and technology wars with China. For quite a long time, China did not openly challenge the United States, but recently, it has changed its strategy. Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with many national leaders in the past several weeks after the G20 summit. Chinese diplomats are working hard to unite as many countries as possible in Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Beijing is preparing for the worst scenario, so it has sent its carriers to greet the U.S. striking groups in the Western Pacific. It also knows it cannot deal with the Western nations by itself, which is why it wants to make friends with as many countries as possible. 2023 is a challenging year for the United States, as a recession is coming, and America's projected economic growth this year is only 1%. For China, however, 2023 is promising, as the country has decided to revive its economy, which is believed to have a growth of around 4.5% or higher. China will contribute more to the world's economy, and for most countries worldwide, Beijing will be more influential than Washington. We do not worry about the confrontation between Chinese and American carriers in the Western Pacific. As we pointed out in previous videos, the US is just flexing its muscle, unwilling to fight with the Chinese Navy directly. The US is still the world's #1 militarily, but it needs to take care of the whole world, not merely the Western Pacific. China only needs to defend its land and people. Suppose the US military lost 2 or 3 carriers in the region, all its bases in Japan and South Korea were destroyed, and Guam could not stop the Chinese Navy from entering the deep ocean. In that case, the United States would lose its global dominance, and many countries, including some of its allies, like Japan, might even take revenge. We regard the visiting USS carriers as attending a show to celebrate the Chinese New Year rather than giving China a hard time. Viewers can get some snacks and beers and enjoy their professional performance. At the end of the video, we again extend our thanks to our supporters and patrons. With their support, DFTW is still fighting.